If you want to read faster, it's not about more practice. It's about learning to see music differently. Most people think reading faster comes from more practice, and yes, in a way that's true, but not completely. It actually comes from what we call chunking, because the brain speeds up by processing groups of notes as single units instead of as individual pieces. So, what is this chunking exactly? Chunking is grouping notes into units. And by doing this, we reduce the cognitive load. A good example of this might be when it comes to phone numbers. We don't typically remember 7 or 10 individual digits. We see them in groups, right, of 3, 3, and 4, area code, the prefix, and the final four numbers. We don't see that individually. That's a great example of just grouping or chunking. So, really, what it comes down to is reading is more about grouping and less about counting or individualizing individual little notes or letters, as the case may be. So, why is chunking really the only path to speed? Well, again, it's grouping notes into units and making fewer decisions per second. The brain has less information that it has to process, and therefore it can speed up. That speed comes from seeing less, not more. It's almost a case of seeing the forest instead of the trees. Not that the trees aren't there, but we're seeing bigger units. So, what are some of the things that could possibly prevent chunking? It could be an over focusing on note names. Now, don't get me wrong, we need to name notes in the beginning. I have students doing this all the time. It's just that we can't stay there indefinitely. Sometimes it can be trying to take on too much new material at one time. Maybe it's a lack of repetition. The brain needs to see things several times in many cases before it starts to recognize things. So sometimes what happens is you're just resetting yourself or your brain with every measure, and that's just making things more complicated as you go. So, what does chunking actually look like? Well, to give you some examples, a a piano player who is a little bit experienced, who has gotten past the initial reading phase, can look at music and pick out intervals, uh, chord shapes, maybe arpeggios, fragments of scales, various visual patterns like this. The brain is looking at these in chunks, much like it looks at a phone number. So, how does chunking develop? Well, chunking starts with decoding. Repetition is what builds recognition. You stop reading and you start recognizing at some point. So maybe it would be interesting to take a look at an actual example of how this happens in music. Let's look at the song Lightly Row. This is in my Keystart Book 2. And let me give you an example. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to use the right hand just to keep this simple. We're going to look at the first, four measures of Lightly Row, just a traditional folk song. And if I play this like someone who is just learning to name notes, and remember, there's nothing wrong with that, it's just that we don't want to stay here. I'm going to look note by note. I'm going to read this note, this note, this note. This would sound like G, E, E, F, D, D. Maybe my mind is thinking about this. I'm trying to play like a beginner might be processing. And then I would do this next little phrase C, D, E, F, G, G, G. Okay, like I said, it's all right to start there, but it's not a place anybody wants to stay for very long. What we want to do instead is we want to start seeing this music in chunks. So, as an experienced player, I would probably view all of these notes as one unit I would play. As as I'm playing that, I'm looking ahead, which is another subject altogether. But my next chunk is basically this measure. And now this next part, this is probably two measures, but this looks like one basic 5-finger pattern to me. C, D, E, F, G, G, G. Could you already feel how much easier that felt? That made it so much easier than thinking in individual units. It takes a little practice, takes some repetition of the right things. Don't try to move on to something harder before this starts to feel a little bit secure. So what was different here? Really, it was the same notes, the same hands, but one way of reading required many individual decisions, right? I had to look at each note. E, G, G, D, F, F. But, after a while, that's decision fatigue is a real thing. So, by chunking, it requires far fewer decisions, and it just makes the whole process so much easier. So if you would like to see exactly what's slowing your reading down, I put together a piano reading audit that walks you through step by step. You can grab that in the link below. And now that you understand chunking, the next step is to learn how to actually train your brain to do this in real time.